Thank you all for joining. We are preparing now to read in Shul Parshas Toldos, and the main feature of the Parsha Toldos is the story where Yaakov finagles the blessings. He sneaks away with the blessings that his father had prepared for his brother Esav, his older brother. That's the main event. A little bit of trickery. Now, a lot has been asked about that story. A lot has been said about that story. A lot has been recorded and written. There's a lot of discussion about that event in the Torah. But aside from all of the major questions that have been asked, here's another question that perhaps we should take a few minutes to discuss, to address. To introduce this story, the Torah tells us that Yitzchak, the father of these twins, Esav and Yaakov, Yitzchak was blind. He could not see. Now, and then the story unfolds. He calls his older son Esav, and he tells him, my days are numbered. I'm coming to the end. I want to give you blessings. And therefore, prepare a dinner for me so that my heart should be gladdened with you. And then I'll bless you. Rivka, the mother of these twins, Yaakov and Esav, hears this conversation between her husband and their oldest son. And she runs to her youngest son and says, it's time for you to take action. We have to make sure that we secure the blessings for you. So they dress Yitzchak in the beautiful coat that belonged to Esav. And she prepares a beautiful dinner for her husband, Yitzchak. Yaakov goes into the room and fools his father, tricks his father into thinking that he is Esav and that he is the one who was meant to receive the blessings. All of this is prefaced by the statement of the Torah, Yitzchak was blind, he could not see. Why would the Torah start the story that way? Why would the Torah open with a statement, Yitzchak had an infirmity? Perhaps is the Torah telling us that it's because of that infirmity that Yitzchak made this egregious mistake to try to give the blessings to his oldest son, Esav? Are we saying that Esav was able to fool his holy father because his father was blind and therefore did not know what kind of person Esav truly was? That kind of spoils the value of those blessings a little bit. Then why are we even excited that Yaakov got them? We're taking away a lot of the beauty of the story if that's how we'll understand it. First of all, we know that Yitzchak was not fooled by Esav. Yitzchak understood who Esav was. In the story, when he asks his son Esav to prepare for him a meal, he says to his son, the Torah says, Sana kelecha, prepare your hunting tools. And Rashi says, why is he telling him to prepare his hunting tools? He is reminding Esav, sharpen your knife so that you can slaughter the animal that you are going to feed to me in a proper and kosher way. Don't feed me non-kosher food. If Yitzchak imagined that Esav was such a righteous and pious person, he would not have to remind him to sharpen the knife properly and not to feed me non-kosher food. Yitzchak understood. Who is this guy, Esav, his oldest son? And anyway, does Yitzchak need eyes to know who his children are? Yitzchak's a holy person. Holy people can see without their eyes. How do we know? In fact, holy people can see farther without their eyes than most of us see with our eyes wide open. How do we know? At the end of the book of Genesis, at the end of Bereshis, we learn about Yaakov blessing the children of Israel before his passing. Yaakov now, at the end of Genesis, he is old and he's going to pass away. And his eyes are also dimmed and he cannot see. And his son Yosef brings his two grandchildren, Menashe and Ephraim, to the room to be blessed by their grandfather. And he has to set his father, Yosef has to set his father Yaakov's hands on the heads of his grandchildren because he cannot see. One hand on the head of Ephraim and one hand on the head of Menashe. Menashe is the older one. So Yosef puts the right hand of his father on Menashe's head. Ephraim is the younger one. So Yosef puts the left hand of his father on Ephraim's head. And Yaakov switches his hands. And Yosef says, no, that's not right. And Yaakov says, that's right. I'm doing it the right way. Why? Because without his physical vision, with his mind's holy eye, Yaakov saw into the future, and he saw that from Menashe will come kings who will bring ruin and destruction to the Jewish nation. And he saw that from Ephraim will come none other than Yehoshua bin Nun, the successor to Moses, who will vanquish the nations who live in the promised land and bring the promised land under the ownership of the Jewish people. A great and pious and holy man. He didn't need his eyes to see that. Does Yitzchak need his eyes to see that his son Esav was wayward? Another question. What's the whole business with closing eyes in Judaism? We see that when something really special is happening, the Jews love to close their eyes. An example, when a young man and woman are getting married, the bride walks down the aisle with her face covered so she cannot see. Why? That's the highlight of her life. It should be, hopefully. She should be able to look around and see the loving faces of her family, her support system, the promise of her future. Why are we covering her eyes? When we come to the height, the peak of our daily prayers, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we close our eyes. Why? I heard once a tremendous idea that I'd like to share with you it's based on the teachings of the Rebbes of Chabad, but it was distilled beautifully by the very famous Rabbi Yossi Jacobson. This idea that Yitzchak's eyes were not working, that Yitzchak's eyes were blind, actually gave him a better ability to see than all of those around him who still had their ability to see physically. What does that mean? It was only because he didn't see through his physical eyes that Yitzchak was able to feel his way through his relationship with his son. Esav was a tricky guy. Esav was certainly, he lived a difficult life. And those around him saw his behavior and judged him for that. Yitzchak didn't see. Yitzchak managed his relationship with his children via his loving fatherly heart. He could feel how badly, how desperately Esav needed the blessings. Yitzchak felt the pain, the anguish of the conflict that raged inside of his son Esav. The Rebbes bring, in order to emphasize this point, they bring a medrash that is incredible from the Targum Yonason. When Yaakov, the brother of Esav, passes away, the 12 tribes of Israel, they carry his body up to the Holy Land, to the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, to bury him next to his wife Leah. When they arrive, Esav is there with a battalion of soldiers, and they're blocking the road. They're not going to let him go. They will not let the 12 tribes of Israel bury Yaakov in the cave of Machpelah. Esav claimed that Yaakov already took his portion by burying his wife Leah there. The remaining grave, there was only one grave site left, and that burial plot belonged, Esav argued, to him. The children should split. Yaakov had prepared his children for this eventuality, and they retorted that when you sold the birthright to our father Yaakov, you also sold the burial plot. And Esav insisted on seeing the receipt. Well, he insisted. So they sent Naphtali, who is known to be incredibly fast, to travel back to Egypt and go into Yosef's royal filing cabinet and bring back the contract that Yaakov had signed with Esav, where Esav had given him the birthright and the burial place. In the meantime, what happened? A grandchild of Yaakov named Chushim ben Dan, he sees that his holy grandfather is laying on the floor and nobody's moving and nothing, there's no activity. And he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't understand what's the holdup, because he, Chushim ben Dan, was deaf. He couldn't hear. And he becomes upset that there's so much disrespect to his holy grandfather Yaakov. What does he do? He starts asking around what's going on, and everybody is indicating to him that Esav is preventing the procession from proceeding. And he took a stick and he smacked Esav on the head with all his might. This severed Esav's head and sent it rolling. And it rolled and it rolled until it entered the cave of Yitzchak, his father. And it landed in the lap of Yitzchak, Esav's father. And that's how it remained. The servants and descendants of Esav became very disturbed, and they buried the body of Esav outside of the cave, and the procession for Yaakov was able to continue. So in the end, there are really 8.5 people buried in the cave of Machpelah. It is Adam and Eve, that's Adam and Chava, Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah, and Esav's head. What is the mystical meaning behind Esav's head ending up in the lap of his father Yitzchak? And the answer is, this is a perfect representation of the person of who Esav was. Esav was a man who suffered a lifetime of torment because of the conflict, the split personality that he had. He was a confused person, a torn person, a lost person. His head was rooted in the holy forefathers, Avraham, Sarah, Yitzchak, Rivka. His head was powerfully holy, tremendous potential in the head, in the upbringing, in the roots of Esav. His spiritual level, the Rebbe actually points to 2 indications of Esav's powerful spiritual level. The first one is the record of his kibud av, the way he honored his father. We are told that there was never a person who honored their father so thoroughly as did Esav, how Esav honored Yitzchak. One example is usually when people go to work, they dress up nice. You put on a suit, you go to the office. When you come home, or when you go to visit the grandparents, or you go to visit your parents, you put on your casuals. For Esav, it was exactly the opposite. Esav went to work in the fields, hunting in his shmatas, but when he went to visit his father, he put on his treasured garments, his treasured clothing. What is this treasured clothing? Well, the story is like this. Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and they were unclothed and not ashamed. And then they ate from the tree of knowledge, and they realized the possible shame that there could be from being unclothed. And so Hashem took pity on them and gave them clothing. These clothes passed from generation to generation until they reached the famous king of the world, Nimrod, or in English, Nimrod. He ruled over the entire world for 185 years. There was no king like him. And he had those clothing. He had those royal, beautiful Gan Eden garments. And he found that when he wore them, animals would obey him. So he wore them on his hunting trips, and the animals obeyed him. Esav heard about this coat, and he decided that he has to get his hands on this coat. And so he went out on a hunting expedition for Nimrod. And he fired his arrow, and he took down Nimrod, and he took his clothing. And he saw how beautiful the clothing was. And on the spot, he determined that he was changing the purpose of the clothes. Previously, it had been used for work in order to catch animals. But from Esav's perspective, the best thing he could do with this beautiful garment, the holy clothing of Gan Eden, was to reserve it for the evening times when he would prepare a meal and feed his father. Every time he entered his father's room, he wore this Gan Eden coat, a tremendous sign of respect for his father and honor. That's one way that we are privy to the tremendous spiritual potential that Esav contained in his soul. Another example is another piece of evidence of Esav's incredible spiritual potential is the tremendous list of converts from his descendants. Who are the converts from the descendants of Esav? Such incredible, powerful people like Rabbi Akiva, Shmaya and Avtalion, the teachers of Hillel, Rabbi Meir, these people formed Judaism as we know now. They led the Jewish people through our hardest, most incredible periods of history. And these all are descendants of Esav. Another example is Onkelos, the Roman, who translated the entire Torah into Aramaic. We don't find these kinds of converts from the side of Yishmael, but we find tremendous converts from the descendants of Esav. This is proof, says the Rebbe, that Esav absorbed the holiness of his parents. And in fact, from a halachic standpoint, Esav is considered a Jew that went astray, as opposed to Yishmael, that's considered a non-Jew. Well, the problem for Esav was that although he had this incredible spiritual potential, he also had a very powerful body and physical urge. He wanted to live. He pursued every possible pleasure. This was a man who, quote unquote, didn't stop at red. You couldn't stop him. He pursued every pleasure. And that's what people around him saw, except Yitzchak. Yitzchak didn't see with his eyes. Yitzchak saw with his heart, with his fatherly heart. And he never gave up on turning his son around. The Torah tells us Yitzchak loved Esav. Rivka loved Yaakov. Rivka had a different perspective. She says you don't give car keys to a child who potentially could be a great driver. Why would you give the blessings of the whole world to a child who potentially could be good, but at the moment isn't? So in that detail, Rivka was correct. But in terms of the entire approach to how Esav needs to be embraced, Yitzchak was perfectly spot on. He never gave up on his son. He never stopped embracing, loving, encouraging, and hoping that one day something would turn in Esav and give him the ability to overcome his conflict, his inner conflict. It's a tremendous story that illustrates this point. Also shared by Rabbi Jacobson. You got to say it in the name of the one who said it first. And that is that a young teacher he made an appointment to see the man who was his teacher 30 years before. He said, I want to meet with you. Met with him, they met up, it was very nice and pleasant. And the young man tells the older man, I want you to know that it's because of you that I chose to become a teacher. What's the story? It says one time in class, one of the students came in with such a cool watch, a brand new watch. It was so exciting. But very soon during the day, the watch disappeared, vanished. And of course, the owner of the watch was beside himself. So you, as the teacher, you told everybody to line up in a row and to close their eyes, and you would secretly find out who had the watch. Everybody lined up, everybody closed their eyes, and you found the watch in my pocket. You checked everybody, right? The teacher checked everybody, so nobody should be able to do mathematical calculations and figure out who was the ganav, who was the thief. And you told everybody, open your eyes, go back to your desks, and you returned the watch to the owner. And the owner was happy, and I was so relieved because you spared me the tremendous, tremendous embarrassment of being labeled forever the ganav. But I have one question, the young man says to his old former teacher. He says, I understand that you didn't tell anybody anything about this, that you didn't speak about it to the class. You didn't uncover my secret. But why didn't you say anything to me? Why didn't you call my parents? Why didn't you, speak to the principal or something? That is something that I couldn't believe it. And the old teacher looks at the young man and says, you have to understand that until this very moment, I didn't know it was you, because I also closed my eyes. I didn't know whose pocket I found the watch in. Maybe that's why, when the time is nigh for something really powerful to happen, Jews close their eyes. You have to see beyond the here and now. You have to be able to look into the future. You have to be able to look to the truth, not to the exterior. The exterior will fool you and confuse you and lead you astray. And when it comes to something really important, like a bride walking to her chuppah, the chassan should not be looking at her face. The groom should not be studying the beauty of his bride. The young man should be looking with his heart, not with his eyes, at her goodness, at her kindness. When we come to say Shema in our prayers, we close our eyes so that we can infuse our hearts and our minds and the world around us with this powerful awareness that Hashem Echad. You can't do that when you're intimidated by all the beauty of the world around you. You've got to shut the world out and see it for what it really is, an avenue through which God's infinite beauty and light will shine through. When a mother stands by her Shabbos candles and prays for her children, she closes her eyes. Because at that moment, when she is going to pray that her children grow to be fine, kind, virtuous people, she has to see them not with her eyes. She has to look beyond all of the behavioral distractions that children often provide we parents with. The mother that prays for her children at the Shabbos candles has to look into their true potential, see them for who they really are. You can't do that with your eyes. You can only do that with your heart. The best way to see is often to close your eyes. I close with one additional story. Just now, not even just now, in 1 hour, will finally come to an end a world record-breaking Zoom meeting. Have you heard about this? The International Conference of Shluchim began on Thursday of last week, a week ago. And it includes all the standard things. Usually we all go to New York and we eat pastrami and we celebrate together. This year we couldn't all go to New York, so the conference moved onto Zoom. On Thursday there were meetings. On Friday there was study sessions and more meetings. And on Saturday night there was a Farbrengen, a Malava Malka, followed by a Farbrengen. That Farbrengen has not ended until now. It goes on even as we speak. 24 hours a day, shluchim from wherever they are in the world are hopping onto this Farbrengen when the sun goes down in their location and the city turns quiet and their work ends for the day. They hop onto this Farbrengen and they stay till the wee hours of the morning. This Farbrengen has gone on since Saturday night, and now it's almost Shabbos. This has been an incredible, unmatched Kinos HaShluchim and an unmatched marathon of Jewish energy and Jewish pride and Jewish joy. And one incredible story came out from all of that Farbrengening that I want to share with you. There was a young man, he was born in Jerusalem to a prim and proper religious family, but I mean, it didn't work out for him. The yeshiva lifestyle was not for him. He wasn't successful. He came to the United States to try to make himself a new life. Life in America didn't work for him either. Every business he tried failed. Every initiative he pursued, it didn't work out. Eventually, he became very frustrated. He became very anxious. He became reliant on the various unhealthy substances, drugs, and alcohol. And before you knew it, he found himself homeless and penniless. In his correspondence with home, he was telling them the beautiful stories of America. So successful, everything is great, raking in the dough, you can't believe this. But he was in severe pain and terrible danger. Eventually, having no other option, he scraped together enough money for a ticket home, back to Jerusalem. On his way to Kennedy Airport, he decided that in his misery, it would be a good idea to visit the gravesite of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Ohel. And he sat in the Ohel, and really he was not given to writing, but in this occasion, he poured his heart and soul into that letter, and he told every story, every business effort, every event, all about the alcohol and the drugs, the failure and the dreams dashed upon the foreign soil of these United States. By the time he finished writing, he was so depleted, he was feeling so low, he could not even get himself to go into the Ohel and deliver the letter and say the prayers. He dallied for a while, he tarried for a while, and then he had to go to the airport. So with his letter still in his pocket, he went to the airport, flew across the ocean, and arrives back home in Israel. And of course, he puts on a great facade. He puts on a good face. Everything was great. Everything was wonderful. And he worried privately how long this euphoria will last and when he'll have to return to his reliance on those very bad substances. Before that could even happen, his sister called him and said, "You need to tell us what we can do to help you." He says, "What do you know?" He says, "We know everything." The sister said, "We know everything. Mom took your clothes to wash and found the letter that you wrote to the Rebbe, in which you recorded your entire story. We know everything, and we are here for you, and we love you, and we support you, and we need you just to stretch out your hand and let us hold you and guide you and take you through this process of healing and getting your life back together." He went through rehab. His family was there with him the whole time. The Rebbe never read the letter, so to speak. The Rebbe never received the letter. It doesn't have to. A real father knows what his children need. A real father never loses sight of the fact that every child of God is a diamond, and that one day somebody can come along who will see the true value of that diamond and bring out its brilliance for the whole world to see. This is why, by the way, when Mashiach comes, we find something very fascinating. Yitzchak will be called our father. Hashem will ask Avraham and Yaakov to proclaim the benefit of the doubt for all of the Jewish people who sinned throughout the ages. And they won't be able to. And then we will say, says the prophet Isaiah, Isaac, Yitzchak is our father. Avraham doesn't know us, and Yaakov does not understand us. Yitzchak is our father. Yitzchak is the true father, who sees with his heart, loves no matter what, cherishes his children, and embraces them with all his might, because he closed his eyes. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. I want to thank my children, Mendele and Maryasha, Chayela and Sterni, for being so quiet during this lecture. It's really a privilege.